"Leave this car immediately. You're disturbing the other passengers." Those sharp, authoritative words came from Chief Attendant Eleanor Vance, directed at a 12-year-old black girl who was quietly seated in seat 3B. The girl tried to explain that her seat was valid, but the chief attendant refused to believe her and promptly forced her to leave. What no one knew was that the girl's mother was on her way, and with the power she held, she would stop the entire train to make those who had humiliated her daughter face the consequences. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Back to our narrative. The girl's name was Simone Dubois, a poised 12-year-old. She wore a neatly buttoned-down blouse, a smart navy blazer, tailored dark gray trousers, and freshly polished black Mary Jane shoes. Not a single wrinkle marred her attire. Her backpack, a sturdy leather one, with her initials elegantly monogrammed, rested tidily beneath her seat. Simone had journeyed by train on countless occasions, but this particular trip marked her inaugural solo adventure. She held a valid executive car ticket firmly in her hand, a fare meticulously purchased by her mother, Dr. Alana Dubois, the visionary CEO and founder of Dubois Transit Innovations, a crucial and esteemed consulting partner for Transcontinental Rail itself. But Simone, with her inherent quiet strength, never felt the need to mention this significant detail. She didn't have to. All she needed to utter with a voice remarkably steady and calm for her age was, "This seat, ma'am, is unequivocally mine. I am not making a request. I am stating an established fact." Eleanor Vance blinked, a momentary flicker of surprise crossing her features, momentarily taken aback by the young girl's profound self-possession. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice now thinly veiled with an almost saccharine, feigned concern. "This is the executive car. You must have made an understandable error in your seating." Her forced smile, however, failed to reach the cold, calculating depths of her eyes. She stood there, effectively blocking the narrow aisle, radiating an air of unyielding authority that silently proclaimed, "I am absolutely correct, and you, dear child, simply haven't grasped that truth yet." Simone, unwavering, did not flinch. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and, with a deliberate slowness, pulled out her boarding pass. She held it up steady and unmistakably clear. "Transcontinental Rail Express 707 Executive Car, Seat 3B. Would you prefer to scan it a second time, just to be sure?" Eleanor did not extend her hand to take the ticket. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "Company protocol strictly mandates that all unaccompanied minors are to be seated in the forwardmost coach section," she declared, her glance sweeping over the plush seat, as if Simone had, through some elaborate trickery, illicitly smuggled herself into the luxurious compartment. "We will make arrangements for a more suitable seat for you back in standard coach. Kindly follow me then." Simone's voice remained unruffled, impressively composed. "That, ma'am, is not at all what the check-in staff conveyed to us. My mother, Dr. Dubois, personally contacted your VIP desk well in advance and meticulously confirmed every detail. I am, in fact, permitted to occupy this seat." Eleanor's expression hardened considerably, her lips thinning into a rigid line. "Young lady, I am certainly not going to engage in an argument with a child. Please, if you would be so kind as to gather your personal effects." A few of the nearby passengers, their conversations fading, began to observe the unfolding scene with growing curiosity. A refined, middle-aged woman of East Asian descent in seat 3D, Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka, leaned slightly across the aisle and whispered with genuine concern, "Why on earth are you attempting to remove her? She isn't doing anything that is remotely wrong." Eleanor Vance, with a practiced dismissiveness, chose to utterly ignore her. Simone, with quiet defiance, remained resolutely seated. Then came the unmistakable call. Eleanor tapped her earpiece, her voice now a low, urgent murmur. "We require a station agent in the executive car immediately. I have a minor in what appears to be the incorrect seat, quite possibly the wrong section altogether." Minutes later, a young, earnest ground staffer swiftly walked up the platform and onto the train. Her name tag clearly identified her as Chloe Davis, and she looked no older than 24. She paused her stride, faltering slightly when her eyes landed on Simone, and she instantly recognized her. Her eyes widened ever so subtly, but her professional demeanor remained perfectly composed. "Allow me to scan the boarding pass, Miss Vance," she interjected politely. Simone handed it to her without a single word. Chloe scanned it. "Confirmed. Seat 3B, Transcontinental Rail priority. Everything checks out." Chloe nodded decisively. She is indeed in the correct seat? Eleanor Vance's lips tightened further, a visible sign of her frustration. Nonetheless, unaccompanied minors typically do not occupy seats in the executive car. Chloe gently but firmly cut her off. Her travel record contains a special clearance note directly from executive operations. It has already received explicit approval. Mrs. Tanaka spoke again, her voice noticeably louder this time, carrying a stronger tone of indignation. So why, pray tell, was she being moved in the first place? Silence hung heavy in the air. Just at that moment, a tall, imposing man in an impeccably tailored business suit stepped into the executive car from the main boarding entrance. This was Mr. Arthur Finch, the senior conductor. "What in the world is happening here?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping from Simone to Eleanor Vance. She quickly offered him a succinct rundown, artfully framing the entire issue as a simple and regrettable misunderstanding. Arthur Finch looked down at Simone, then at Chloe. Then, with a chilling lack of warmth, he stated, "Let's simply relocate her to standard coach. We absolutely do not desire any disruptions prior to departure." Chloe looked utterly stunned, her professionalism briefly faltering. "Sir, she is fully cleared." Arthur Finch raised a dismissive hand. "We shall address this matter at a later time. For now, just ensure she rises and moves." Simone did not shed a single tear. She did not raise her voice in protest. She stood up with a deliberate slowness, picked up her monogram backpack, and cast one last lingering look at the plush seat she was being forced to abandon. Then, with a quiet strength that belied her age, she turned to Eleanor Vance and said softly, "I truly hope you comprehend the magnitude of what you have just done." And with those profound words, she walked out of the executive car, escorted not by a gesture of kindness or understanding, but by a rigid adherence to policy. A policy subtly twisted and corrupted by an undercurrent of prejudice. They seated her near the rear of the train, close to the service car, a compartment typically reserved for staff or those requiring extra space for luggage. She did not argue or protest. She simply sat down, her back once again perfectly straight, her eyes fixed on the safety instructions above. A man across the aisle stared at her with an intensity that felt both curious and intrusive. A younger couple whispered conspiratorially, their glances darting in her direction, but Simone did not look at them. She calmly pulled out her smartphone, unlocked it, and pressed a single pre-programmed contact. It rang once, then twice. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke, "Mom, it's happening again." The gentle hum of the train's propulsion system was a faint, distant lullaby as Simone sat alone, tucked away in a corner seat near the service car, far removed from the lavish comfort of seat 3B, far from the thoughtful arrangements her mother had so carefully made for her. The air around her felt considerably heavier than before, as if the very essence of dignity had been meticulously drained from the compartment drop by agonizing drop. But the girl did not slouch. She did not pout or display any childish indignation. She sat tall, her back ramrod straight, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, exactly as she had been diligently taught. Across the aisle, passengers exchanged confused glances, uncertain whether they had just borne witness to a genuine mistake or something far more deliberate and insidious. Chloe Davis, the young black ground staffer who had scanned Simone's boarding pass mere minutes earlier, lingered near the front galley, her gaze frequently drifting back towards the rear of the train where Simone had been relegated, her brow furrowed with concern as she tapped methodically on her tablet, every single detail in the system checked out flawlessly. Simone Dubois' executive car fully cleared. An executive override clearly on file. There was on paper no discernible reason whatsoever for her to have been moved. None that made logical sense based on the documented facts. She could feel it deep within her gut. That slow, sickening churn, the kind of visceral reaction you only experience when something isn't merely incorrect, it's profoundly unjust. She stepped back onto the platform and with a swift, decisive motion pulled out her personal phone. Her voice was low, hushed, but undeniably firm. "Yes. Hello, this is Chloe at Platform 12. I believe you need to alert VIP services. Dr. Alana Dubois' daughter has just been forcibly removed from the executive car." Then she abruptly hung up. No panic, no theatrical drama, just a quiet, unvarnished truth relayed with the same understated composure that Simone herself had displayed back inside the train. Eleanor Vance stood in the aisle, her smile stretched tightly across her face, as if absolutely nothing untoward had transpired. She bent with feigned attentiveness to adjust a seatbelt in row 4, carefully, almost deliberately ignoring the low murmur of unease that was steadily rising behind her. "She will be perfectly fine," Eleanor declared to no one in particular, her voice tinged with a detached airiness. Children possess an astonishing resilience. But not everyone present shared her dispassionate view. In seat 3D, Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka, the East Asian passenger who had bravely spoken up earlier, sat with her arms tightly folded, her eyes narrowed to mere slits of disbelieving indignation. "That young girl had a legitimate ticket," she whispered vehemently to the man seated beside her. "A valid executive car ticket. I personally witnessed it. I couldn't care less what they claim. That was not company policy. That was without a shadow of a doubt something far more sinister." Meanwhile, near the rear of the train, Simone sat utterly unmoving, yet her thoughts were a whirlwind of quiet activity. They spun in a rhythmic, sharp, and steady cadence, a pattern all too tragically familiar. This was not the first time such an indignity had occurred. A mere year prior, on a different rail line while traveling with her mother, a strikingly similar incident had unfolded. A suspicious, lingering glance, a hushed, derogatory comment, a subsequent reassignment for alleged safety concerns. Back then, when they finally reached their destination, she had cried inconsolably. But not this time. Now, at 12 years old, she understood with crystalline clarity exactly what had transpired. "My mother always said, never ever raise your voice," she murmured softly to herself, her gaze fixed intently on the service button above her seat. "Instead, raise the undeniable truth." At the front of the train, senior conductor Arthur Finch was still standing near the driver's cabin. His arms crossed his entire body language, screaming a profound disinterest. When Chloe briefly returned to speak with him, her tone impeccably professional, he did not even bother to lift his gaze from the manifest clipboard. "We have received clearance to secure the cabin doors," he announced brusquely. "Let us proceed with getting this train in motion." Sir Chloe replied carefully, her voice laced with a subtle warning. "Dr. Alana Dubois is listed on the Transcontinental Rail VIP register. Furthermore, she serves as an external consultant for our very own operations department. If her daughter was indeed reassigned inappropriately—" Arthur Finch cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Look, she's just a child. She will readily obtain another seat. We are certainly not going to delay this entire train departure over a mere seat assignment." Chloe did not argue further, but she also did not leave. She stood perfectly still for a protracted moment, allowing her palpable silence to eloquently convey her message. Then she turned and walked away, heading straight towards the front desk. Meanwhile, Simone's phone vibrated quietly in her palm. One new message: "On my way. Don't move." Just 5 words, but they carried the profound weight of a calm, impending thunder. Simone did not smile, but her eyes, for the very first time since she had been relegated to that rear seat, blinked a little slower, a subtle sign of a nascent relief. In the executive car, Mr. Charles Alastair, a distinguished, well-dressed gentleman in his late 60s, looked up from his digital newspaper. He had remained profoundly quiet throughout the entire ordeal, carefully watching, meticulously absorbing every detail. His own father had instilled in him the invaluable lesson of quiet observation, and in his extensive years of traveling by rail, he had encountered every conceivable type of traveler in the executive car. But this particular incident marked the very first time he had witnessed a child so impeccably dressed and composed being forcibly removed without any justifiable cause. He did not utter a single word yet, but something deep within him shifted, a poignant memory resurfacing of having been on the wrong side of silence far too many times in his own life. Bias, he mused to himself, is not always proclaimed loudly. Near the platform entrance, a palpable commotion began to stir. The automated glass doors of the station parted smoothly, and into the executive car stepped a tall woman in a charcoal gray pantsuit. No scarf, just crisp lines and an official ID badge clipped securely to her lapel. It was Dr. Alana Dubois, CEO of Dubois Transit Innovations. But here in this moment, she wasn't merely the head of a multi-million-dollar company. She was first and foremost a mother, and her daughter had called. Chloe Davis spotted her first and moved with swift professional urgency. "Dr. Dubois," she said quietly, her voice imbued with a sense of genuine urgency. Your daughter's boarding pass was absolutely valid. We scanned it ourselves. She was in 3B. I genuinely do not understand why they moved her. Dr. Dubois nodded once a brief, sharp acknowledgement. You performed your duties impeccably. Thank you. Her voice was calm, perfectly controlled, yet there was no mistaking the steely resolve that lay beneath its composed surface. Without waiting for any official permission, she walked past the check-in counter and purposefully onto the platform. Two executives from Transcontinental Rail's Client Relations Department scurried behind her, attempting somewhat futilely to catch up. Madame, we are actively managing this situation. You were not present, Dr. Dubois stated, her voice resonating with an undeniable authority. Now, you most certainly will be. Back inside the compartment, Simone glanced up from her seat and saw the familiar, imposing figure of her mother appear at the front door. Her posture did not alter, but something profound and comforting settled within her chest. Her mother had arrived, not with shouting or theatrics, not with an army of lawyers, but simply with her powerful, undeniable presence. And with that, the story was no longer merely about one girl and one seat. It was about something far greater, something that was poised to profoundly shift the delicate balance of silence and accountability in the realm of rail travel. The engines of Transcontinental Rail Express 707 hadn't even fully powered up for departure, but something deeper, more significant, had already set into motion. A shift in energy, quiet but powerfully palpable, that pulsed through the compartment like a low-pressure system preceding an inevitable storm. Simone sat alone in the rear section, tucked snugly by the service car, far from the wide, plush leather seats, the warm towels, and the sparkling beverages of the executive car. She didn't fidget. She didn't lean against the window in a posture of resignation. She simply sat there, back straight, still quiet from an external perspective. From an outside observer's vantage point, one might have mistakenly interpreted her stillness for a profound sense of calm. But deep inside, it was not peace that resided. It was a tumultuous process of internal processing, the kind of profound silence that intensifies when one's dignity is undeniably dented, yet one's inherent pride resolutely refuses to allow it to shatter. Her phone rested face down on her lap, Dr. Dubois' last message still softly glowing through the glass. On my way. Don't move. Simone hadn't replied. She didn't need to. She knew with an intuitive certainty that her mother understood the immense weight of silence, the kind that speaks volumes louder than anything ever shouted across a bustling train terminal. The cabin crew members moved past her as if she were utterly invisible, non-existent. Eleanor Vance stood at the front galley, engaging in light-hearted chatter with another attendant, chuckling softly about a passenger who had requested sparkling water with lime instead of lemon. As if absolutely nothing of consequence had transpired, as if the unjust displacement of a child, a fully paying executive car passenger, was a mere footnote in the day's trivialities, not a glaring and profound fault. One row back, a young toddler cried piteously over a dropped toy. Someone rang the service button, requesting another blanket. Life in its ordinary course moved relentlessly forward, but Simone remained immovably anchored in that quiet corner, not as a child throwing a tantrum, but as a discerning person remembering. And memory for Simone was not a distant hazy fog. It was vivid, sharply defined. Last year, Seattle to Portland, she was with her mother, Dr. Alana Dubois, a renowned architect and urban planner traveling to present at a significant conference. They were both impeccably dressed, both carrying matching bespoke luggage with pre-reserved seats in business class. But the gate agent, with a surprising and delightful gesture, had offered them an unexpected upgrade, 2 seats in the executive car at no additional charge. A gesture of gratitude, he had explained, for their frequent and loyal patronage. They were both thrilled beyond measure. But 30 minutes into boarding, a different train attendant had approached them, looked directly at her mother, and asked with an unsettling inflection, "Are you absolutely certain these are your seats?" That was the precise, unsettling phrasing. "Are you sure?" As if it were utterly inconceivable that her mother could possibly be in the right. Dr. Dubois had calmly displayed the passes, offering a polite, reassuring smile, but the woman had pressed further aggressively, suggesting they had somehow made a mistake. Another attendant had joined her, their combined skepticism forming a palpable barrier. It took a full 5 minutes, 2 separate scans of their passes, and 1 reluctant, grudging apology before they were finally permitted to remain seated. But something within her mother had undeniably dimmed that day. and after they disembarked, she had told Simone quietly in the back of the taxi, "Next time, my dear, we will book under your father's business account." And Simone remembered distinctly thinking, why on earth should that even matter? She never received a satisfactory answer. But now, sitting utterly alone in the rear compartment, she felt the familiar sting return. Not the exact raw wound, but the deep underlying scar being deliberately poked at once more. Simone looked down at her polished shoes, still shined, their laces still tied tightly. She hadn't moved. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even breathed heavily enough to betray her internal turmoil, but she was acutely aware of the way people looked, the way the man across the aisle had watched her walk past, curious, yet utterly unbothered, the way a teenage boy seated behind her had smirked with a knowing condescension, and most of all, the way Eleanor Vance's voice had sharpened with an immediate, almost instinctive hostility the very second she saw her in 3B. She hadn't bothered to ask for any identification. She hadn't even bothered to scan anything herself. She had simply decided, and decided loudly with an unshakable conviction, and no one had intervened to stop her until now, because down the platform steps a presence was unmistakably making its way. 15 minutes had elapsed since that fateful call. 15 minutes of profound quiet. 15 minutes of holding herself together with an incredible resolve, not because she was explicitly told to, but because she chose to with every fiber of her young being. And then a powerful presence shifted at the gate. Passengers turned their heads subtly, almost imperceptibly. A few leaned into the aisle, their curiosity piqued. Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka, still seated steadfastly in 3D, clutched her scarf a little tighter, her eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Mr. Charles Alastair looked up from his tablet, his expression now one of deep concentration. At first, it was merely a tall silhouette, a woman in a dark, perfectly tailored pantsuit, understated, yet commanding no flashy watch, no decorative scarf, just a crisp white blouse open at the collar, and a Transcontinental Rail executive badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Dr. Alana Dubois, CEO of Dubois Transit Innovations, and the very person Transcontinental Rail had commissioned to consult on their groundbreaking new passenger inclusion protocols. Irony, as it profoundly turned out, had just walked directly through their own front door. Dr. Dubois didn't stride with aggressive purpose. She didn't storm in with theatrical indignation. She walked with an almost serene purpose, with a profound stillness, the kind that inexplicably makes people sit straighter without fully understanding why. Eleanor Vance caught a fleeting glimpse of her as she stepped into the executive car, a sudden panicked gasp catching in her throat. "Madam, you cannot." Dr. Dubois simply raised a hand, a gesture of quiet authority, then reached into her inside pocket, calmly removed a laminated ID card, and held it out steady and irrefutable. "Dr. Alana Dubois, Transcontinental Rail Partner, Executive Operations Access. I require to see the crew immediately." There was no yelling, no visible tension etched on her face, but something about the profound stillness in her eyes spoke volumes, saying everything that needed to be said. Eleanor Vance's jaw tightened perceptibly. "We were unaware she was—" Dr. Dubois cut her off with a slow, deliberate blink. "You were unaware of who her mother was, but you knew precisely what she looked like, and that Miss Vance was evidently enough for you." Conductor Miles, the chief conductor, stepped out of his cabin. He was a composed man in his early 50s, profoundly experienced and rarely shaken. "Dr. Dubois," he began cautiously, his voice tinged with surprise. "I was not fully informed of any issue." "I am not here to receive apologies." "Conductor Miles," Dr. Dubois replied, her tone never once rising above a calm, unwavering level. "I am here for my daughter, and I am here for the unvarnished truth." That was the precise moment when Simone rose from her seat in the back. She didn't rush. She didn't create any kind of scene. She simply picked up her backpack, walked the length of the aisle in perfect, profound silence, and stopped directly in front of her mother. The two stood there for a profound moment, eye to eye, their connection palpable. No words were needed between them. Then Simone asked, her voice as clear and unwavering as ever, "Are we going to fix this, Mom?" Dr. Dubois didn't respond immediately. She turned her gaze to the train crew, to the executives who had sheepishly followed her on board, and then back to Eleanor Vance and Arthur Finch, whose silence now felt less professionally controlled and far more exposed, almost painfully vulnerable. Finally, Dr. Dubois looked down at her daughter and said calmly, but with an undeniable firmness, "We are not merely fixing it, my love. We are resetting the entire standard." And with those powerful words, the train compartment was no longer just a mere compartment. It transformed quite suddenly into a silent courtroom, and justice was about to be meticulously served quietly, thoroughly, and in the full, unavoidable view of everyone who had mistakenly believed they could circumvent accountability by confusing skin tone with social status. You could tangibly feel the tension shift the very moment Dr. Alana Dubois stepped fully into the compartment. Not with any dramatic noise, not with any overt theatrics, but with that heavy, undeniable presence that only certain individuals possess. It wasn't merely the expensive pantsuit or the executive badge clipped neatly to her lapel. It was the deliberate way she moved, purposeful and profoundly composed, like a woman who had absolutely no need to raise her voice to command attention and be heard. The few passengers who recognized her sat up straighter, an almost instinctive reaction. Others simply sensed something profoundly different, as if the very air itself had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. Eleanor Vance, who had just moments ago dismissed a 12-year-old girl from seat 3B with such audacious confidence, now stood near the galley, her forced smile flickering, as if unsure whether to brace herself for a defensive confrontation or to deflect with a practiced superficial charm. "Madam, we were genuinely unaware that Simone was—" She began, her voice now noticeably softer, almost pleasantly conciliatory, but Dr. Dubois did not even spare her a glance. She turned instead to her daughter, who had just walked up the aisle from her temporary, unjustly assigned seat near the service car. The two stood silently, mother and daughter, just a few feet apart, their bond a visible force. Simone did not cry, did not complain. She looked up at her mother with eyes that carried both an intrinsic pride and a quiet, poignant question. "Did I perform adequately? Did I manage this situation correctly?" Dr. Dubois offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then gently placed a reassuring hand on Simone's shoulder. "You performed precisely as I taught you, my dear," she said calmly, her voice a balm. "Now let us bring this to a conclusion in the proper manner." Then she turned her gaze, shifting to Conductor Miles, who had just stepped out of his cabin with the hesitant demeanor of a man not fully briefed on the specifics, but acutely aware that something had gone profoundly awry. "Conductor Miles," she stated, her voice clear and resonant, "I am formally requesting a temporary hold on departure. This train will not move an inch until we have comprehensively addressed a very serious incident involving a first-class seat reassignment and undeniable potential discrimination." Conductor Miles, a seasoned veteran with distinguished salt-and-pepper hair and the stoic demeanor of someone well accustomed to managing chaos, held his hands up slightly in a gesture of placation. "Dr. Dubois, I was genuinely not made aware of any such issue until this very moment. If you would perhaps grant me a moment to investigate." Dr. Dubois raised a single expressive brow. "Your crew conductor removed a child from a confirmed executive car seat, and not just any child, my child. And not just any seat, a paid, confirmed, pre-cleared seat, meticulously arranged through your very own VIP operations department. You did not need to know she was my daughter, but anyone should have intervened and stopped it the very second her right to be there was questioned. Instead, it was unjustly escalated publicly and entirely without cause." Arthur Finch, the senior conductor who had been leaning casually against the cabin door frame, now stepped forward, his composure visibly beginning to fray. "Now, sir, if I may, I'd like to explain." "You may not," Dr. Dubois interrupted, her voice still composed, but now infused with an unwavering steeliness. "You were the one who instructed the ground agent, and I quote, 'Just move the kid.' I possess the video evidence to prove it." Arthur Finch's mouth opened slightly as if to formulate some desperate excuse, but no words materialized. Eleanor Vance stepped in again, attempting rather feebly to soften the palpable tension of the moment. "Dr. Dubois, we were merely following standard protocol when a child is traveling alone." "Don't," Dr. Dubois said quietly, her voice laced with a quiet warning. "Do not attempt to hide behind policy. This was not about procedure. This was unequivocally about perception. You observed a black child in the executive car and immediately assumed she did not belong. That was not a policy failure, Miss Vance. That was a personal judgment call, and it was profoundly wrong." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then from directly behind Dr. Dubois, a new voice emerged. "I witnessed it too," stated Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka, now standing tall in her seat at 3D. She looked around the compartment as if finally deciding that enough was unequivocally enough. That young girl displayed her ticket clearly politely. Miss Vance didn't even bother to glance at it. She simply called for backup. And none of us intervened to stop it. We simply watched it happen, Mrs. Tanaka concluded, her voice filled with a quiet shame. Eleanor Vance's face flushed a deep crimson, but she remained utterly silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, another voice joined in. Mr. Charles Alastair, the older, distinguished gentleman in seat 1A, who had remained silent until this very moment. He slowly set down his tablet, stood up with a deliberate grace, and spoke with the measured, calm tone of someone who had lived through decades of acquired hindsight. I judged her too. He openly admitted his gaze, now respectfully fixed on Simone. I looked up and saw a young girl sitting alone in the executive car and thought, perhaps she is in the wrong place. I did not voice that thought, but I undeniably harbored it, and I was profoundly mistaken. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not merely about policy. This is about the fundamental way we perceive and categorize people. Dr. Dubois nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of his courageous honesty. Then she turned her piercing gaze back to the crew. You have precisely two choices, she stated clearly, her voice leaving no room for misinterpretation. You can either proceed with this journey after issuing a comprehensive formal apology to my daughter and immediately reinstating her to her rightful seat, or you can undertake the unenviable task of explaining to your superiors and to the discerning public why Transcontinental Rail allowed implicit bias to unequivocally override confirmed boarding rights. Arthur Finch's face was now remarkably pale, drained of all color. Eleanor Vance stared down at the floor, her eyes fixed on an unseen point. Neither of them moved a muscle. Dr. Dubois then turned to Chloe Davis, who had quietly re-entered the compartment at the rear. Chloe, she said, her voice gentle yet authoritative, could you please be so kind as to escort Simone back to 3B? Chloe smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips, and walked purposefully up the aisle. Of course, Dr. Dubois. It would be my honor. Simone did not wait for assistance. She stepped forward entirely on her own, looked Eleanor Vance directly in the eyes, not with anger, but with that same quiet, unyielding strength her mother carried, and walked back to seat 3B as if she had never for a single moment departed from it. A few passengers, emboldened by the moment, clapped softly, not a resounding ovation, but enough to make a quiet, significant point. As Simone settled back into her seat, Dr. Dubois turned to the crew one last time. Bias does not always manifest with a loud shout, she stated, her voice resonating with deep truth. Sometimes it whispers insidiously behind a false smile. Sometimes it insidiously hides within the rigid confines of a policy. But my daughter heard it unequivocally, and so did I. Then she took a deep, deliberate breath, looked directly at Conductor Miles, and said with an air of absolute finality, "This train conductor does not depart until the wrong people step off it." For a few profound moments, the executive car of Transcontinental Rail Express 707 felt like a courtroom suspended in the quiet air, even though the train hadn't moved an inch from the platform. Outside, the tracks shimmered under the late afternoon sun, but inside it was something colder, a palpable tension, utterly still. Every single passenger now knew, with undeniable certainty, that they had witnessed something far larger than a mere seating error. This was unmistakably a reckoning. Dr. Alana Dubois stood at the front of the executive car, not as a CEO ostentatiously flashing her credentials, but as a mother whose unwavering quiet resolve had undeniably shifted the entire atmosphere of the compartment. Her daughter Simone, now once again seated in 3B, did not require overt protection. She required the unvarnished truth, and her mother was meticulously delivering it, word by carefully measured word. Conductor Miles cleared his throat, a nervous, almost imperceptible sound, and stepped forward. Dr. Dubois, I fully comprehend your grave concern, but may I respectfully suggest we de-escalate this situation with a formal report to be filed promptly after departure. Dr. Dubois turned to him, her gaze calm, yet piercingly sharp. No, Conductor Miles, we absolutely do not depart with this particular crew, still responsible for that despicable action. Do you genuinely expect me to file paperwork later while Eleanor Vance pours champagne up here and pretends that nothing, absolutely nothing happened? I think not. Arthur Finch, the senior conductor, stepped up, his voice noticeably low, but undeniably defensive. It was not a personal affront, madam. We harbored no intention of causing any harm. Dr. Dubois looked straight at him, her gaze unyielding. That, Mr. Finch, is precisely the problem. You made it personal the very second you perceived her skin. And do not, under any circumstances, dare to confuse intent with impact. This is not about whether you intended to cause harm. It is unequivocally about the harm you caused. Arthur Finch exhaled slowly, a long, drawn-out sigh, his carefully constructed composure visibly cracking. I merely followed the lead attendant's judgment. She stated it was a policy issue. No, Dr. Dubois asserted firmly. She said it was a policy issue, and you believed her without ever bothering to verify the facts. That, Mr. Finch, is not protocol. That, sir, is complicity. The silence that followed was broken not by an airline staffer, but by a passenger. Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka, seated firmly and defiantly in 3D, stood up once more, her voice clear, imbued with a quiet pride. He's absolutely correct. I witnessed everything unfold. That young girl was calm, respectful, and meticulously prepared. She even politely asked her to rescan her boarding pass. Eleanor Vance never even bothered to look. She simply dismissed her outright. Her voice caught briefly a tremor of emotion, but she pushed through. And you all of you permitted her to do so. I did not speak loudly enough when it truly mattered, but I am unequivocally speaking now. Dr. Dubois nodded to her gently, a silent gesture of gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Tanaka. Then turning back to the crew, she added, she did not know who Simone was, and that precisely is the entire point. No child, no person should ever have to carry a title, a distinguished last name, or an official badge to be treated with fundamental human respect. At that profound moment, Mr. Charles Alastair, the older white gentleman in 1A, stood up once again, this time with even greater certainty and resolve in his voice. You know, he began, his voice thoughtful, I've traveled with transcontinental rail for over 25 years, and I have witnessed the good and regrettably the bad. I have partaken of fine sparkling cider in this very seat on a festive holiday morning, but I have also sadly observed how rapidly individuals like that young lady over there are subjected to judgment not based on their impeccable behavior, but purely on their perceived presence. He paused, turning his gaze toward Eleanor Vance and Arthur Finch. Today, I regretfully watched a child be utterly stripped of her dignity in front of an entire compartment filled with adults who chose to remain silent, and I myself stood by and said nothing. That unequivocally is on me. He looked directly at Dr. Dubois. I judged her too, and I was profoundly mistaken. Thank you for providing us with this stark, necessary reminder. Eleanor Vance shifted uncomfortably, her arms still tightly crossed. Look, I genuinely did not intend to insult anyone. I have been in this demanding job for 18 years. I trust my instincts implicitly. Dr. Dubois' eyes narrowed to sharp slits. Instinct, miss. Vance is never an acceptable excuse for injustice. Experience should in fact render you more cautious, not more utterly careless. Arthur Finch stepped back, visibly shaken, his earlier bravado completely dissipated. Conductor Miles exhaled slowly, a sound of profound resignation. What precisely are you asking us to do, madam? Dr. Dubois did not hesitate, her response immediate and unwavering. I am formally asking Transcontinental Rail to remove Eleanor Vance and Arthur Finch from this journey, effective immediately. They are unequivocally not fit to serve, not with my daughter on board, not with any passenger who has borne witness to this appalling unfolding. She turned to the passengers, her gaze sweeping over them. Is there anyone here who objects to this entirely reasonable request? No one raised a hand. In fact, a notable few people nodded slowly, their expressions solemn. The atmosphere had undergone a complete transformation, no longer an awkward, stifling silence. This was support, quiet but undeniably real. Chloe Davis stepped forward from the galley, her professionalism reasserted. We have 2 standby crew members at Platform 10. They can be on board within 10 minutes. Conductor Miles paused, his internal struggle visible, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood. I shall make the necessary call. Eleanor Vance's face fell a mask of disbelief. You are removing me from the journey for what a simple misunderstanding. Dr. Dubois turned to her one last time, her gaze unwavering. No, Miss Vance, not a misunderstanding, a profound misjudgment, and one that my daughter will remember with vivid clarity for the remainder of her life. She deserved better. And now, so too will every passenger who follows her. As Eleanor Vance and Arthur Finch gathered their belongings and were somberly escorted off the train by another supervisor, there was no applause, no public shaming, just a profound, pervasive silence, the kind that descends when truth lands with such undeniable force that it requires no echo. Simone sat quietly watching them go. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply whispered to herself, "I am not angry, but I remember everything." Dr. Dubois walked over to her daughter, knelt slightly beside her seat, and asked gently, "Do you wish for me to remain on board for the duration of the journey?" Simone looked up, her clear eyes meeting her mother's, and said, "I will be perfectly fine, Mom. Please go and do what you need to do." Dr. Dubois smiled a small, proud curve of her lips. "You have already done precisely what I raised you to do, my darling." Then she turned to the transcontinental rail executives who had now rather sheepishly entered the compartment after witnessing everything from the platform. "This, gentleman, is not merely about my daughter," Dr. Dubois informed them, her voice calm but resonant. "It is about every single passenger you have ever mistakenly judged. It is about trust, about the often perilous silence, about whether Transcontinental Rail genuinely desires to simply operate trains or to establish an entirely new standard for the rails." They nodded slowly, wordlessly, their expressions chastened. One of them made a discreet note in his phone. Another whispered something urgent into an earpiece. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka reached across the aisle to hand Simone a small but meticulously folded piece of paper. On it, in elegant, flowing calligraphy, she had written, "Thank you for standing so tall, even when so many adults chose to sit down." And from behind her, Mr. Charles Allister added quietly, his voice filled with admiration, "Dignity is remarkably contagious, young one. Do not under any circumstances allow the world to ever take that from you." The train remained grounded for just a few more minutes, but something far more significant had already taken flight. It didn't take long for the platform gate to reopen. Within minutes of Conductor Miles's urgent call, 2 new crew members, 1 train attendant, and 1 standby senior conductor arrived at Platform 12. They were professional focused and respectfully quiet, keenly aware that they were stepping into a situation far more delicate and consequential than a simple personnel swap. As Eleanor Vance and Arthur Finch were officially removed from the train manifest, the compartment doors remained open, not because of a technical delay, but because Transcontinental Rail, whether they fully realized it or not, was in the process of rewriting a crucial chapter in how it treated its cherished passengers. And at the very heart of that profound shift sat a 12-year-old girl, her hands folded her back perfectly straight, her eyes calm and serene, just as they always were. Simone didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. When the new train attendant, a soft-spoken woman named Miss Olivia Reed, stepped into the executive car and approached her, she knelt slightly, her demeanor respectful and kind, and said, "Miss Simone, we are truly honored to have you back precisely where you belong." Simone looked her directly in the eye and nodded a subtle gesture of acceptance. "Thank you, ma'am," she said gently. "I'm perfectly okay." Around her, passengers remained quiet. Not out of indifference, but out of a profound sense of reverence and respect. They had borne witness to something they would never, ever forget. Not a childish tantrum, not a fleeting viral moment, but dignity. Dignity practiced, dignity persistent, and dignity utterly real. Dr. Dubois remained on board for a few minutes longer, standing near the front as the 2 new crew members settled into their roles. She turned to the Transcontinental Rail executives who had now fully entered the compartment, flanked by their own Director of Passenger Operations. "This, gentleman, is emphatically not the end of this conversation," Dr. Dubois informed them, still calm but undeniably firm. "When my daughter's inherent dignity is so brazenly dismissed in such a manner, what does that say about your entire crew? What does that communicate about your entire operational system?" The operations director, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses and a visibly flushed face, nodded slowly. "Dr. Dubois, we fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. We will conduct a thorough and exhaustive review, and we are truly grateful you handled this with such—" Dr. Dubois raised a hand, slightly cutting him off. "Do not thank me for merely doing what any loving mother should instinctively do. Thank Simone for not losing her voice when yours so conspicuously failed her." Then, just before gracefully stepping off the train, Dr. Dubois turned and addressed the passengers, not with a lengthy speech, not with any grand drama, but with a simple, resonant sentence. We cannot truly move forward if we are still fundamentally stuck in where we think people belong." And then she left the compartment door hissing softly closed behind her. It was not the dramatic exit of a CEO. It was the quiet, purposeful departure of a woman who understood with absolute certainty that her most significant work would only truly begin once the wheels left the ground. Back in 3B, Simone sat with a small cup of sparkling water and a delicate pastry the new train attendant had thoughtfully brought her. Not a bribe, not a calculated performance, just a simple act of kindness. Genuine kindness. Mrs. Kimiko. Tanaka leaned toward her from 3D and said softly, her voice filled with quiet admiration, "If I had possessed even half your grace when I was your age, my life, I assure you, would have been profoundly different." Simone offered a small, knowing smile. "My mom says grace isn't about letting things go. It's about carrying them correctly always." Mrs. Tanaka chuckled warmly. "Your mother, dear, raised you impeccably." In row 1, Mr. Charles Alastair sat with his hands folded, occasionally glancing back at Simone. After a few minutes, he stood, turned around, and crouched down gently beside Simone's seat. "May I be so bold as to say something, young lady?" he asked gently, his voice sincere. Simone looked up, her eyes clear. "Of course, sir." Charles cleared his throat, a small nervous sound. "When I first observed you sitting down earlier, I confess I made a judgment. Not because you did anything wrong, but simply because of my own preconceived notions. And that was fundamentally wrong. And I want you to know, young Simone, that I see you now. Not as a child, not merely as someone's daughter, but as a remarkable young woman who has powerfully reminded me what true dignity looks like." Simone blinked once, her composure unwavering, then replied, "Thank you for telling me that, sir. Most people regrettably do not." Charles smiled, a genuine warm expression. "I shall strive to do better next time. That, young Simone, is a solemn promise." As he returned to his seat, a quiet, profound kind of warmth subtly spread through the compartment. No thunderous applause, no frenzied social media outbursts, just human beings, humbled and reflective, realizing they possessed more to learn, and someone a young girl had just taught them a timeless lesson. Up near the cabin, Conductor Miles finished meticulously reviewing the final checklist with his new senior conductor. His tone was steady once more, a return to his professional calm, but his eyes now held a different kind of heightened focus. He called back to the lead train attendant, "Let's secure the cabin doors. We are now ready for departure." But before she sealed the door, the Transcontinental Rail Operations Director made one last decisive move. He leaned over to Mrs. Kimiko Tanaka and whispered, "Would you, madame, be open to speaking with us after the journey concludes? We are actively assembling a new passenger advisory group, and your voice, Mrs. Tanaka, clearly holds significant weight." Mrs. Tanaka's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You genuinely desire my involvement. You bravely spoke up when it counted the most." He responded, his voice earnest. "That, madam, is more than most." Mrs. Tanaka nodded slowly. "I will certainly consider it, but only if you allow Simone to speak first." The man glanced at Simone, then smiled. "Deal." And that, remarkably, was not the only significant change. By the time Dr. Alana Dubois reached the VIP lounge, she had already dispatched a meticulously crafted email to Transcontinental Rail's Board of Directors, a formal and unequivocal request to undertake a comprehensive review of all crew bias protocols and training systems, accompanied by a detailed proposal to pilot a groundbreaking new initiative specifically focused on how train crews identify approach and genuinely support underrepresented passengers. Attached to this compelling proposal was a name destined to become a powerful symbol, the Dubois Standard. But Simone, utterly unaware of these monumental developments, simply looked out the window as the train pulled away from the platform, thinking about how remarkably strange it felt to be so young and yet already teaching grown adults what true fairness should profoundly look like. Miss Olivia Reed, the new train attendant, returned to check on her once more, her demeanor gentle and caring. "Everything satisfactory, Miss Simone?" She nodded. "Yes, thank you, ma'am." She paused, then added gently, her voice infused with genuine warmth, "If there is anything else you require, anything at all, you must simply let me know." Simone glanced around the executive car, then back at her. "I am not angry," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I remember everything." Miss Reed's eyes softened, a recognition of profound truth. "That, my dear, is precisely why you will instigate change, not merely generate noise. A moment later, the mighty train lifted into the vast open countryside, its movement quiet, steady, much like the young girl seated in 3B. And for the very first time that day, Simone closed her eyes, not in resignation or defeat, but in a quiet, profound peace. 3 weeks later, Transcontinental Rail convened a major press conference at its national headquarters in Chicago, Illinois. The backdrop was sleek, adorned with elegant navy and silver banners, the company's insignia gleaming beneath soft professional studio lighting, but there was no escaping the true focus of what genuinely mattered. At the very center of the elevated stage stood Dr. Alana Dubois, CEO of Dubois Transit Innovations and a strategic consultant to Transcontinental Rail's executive board. She did not wear a formal pantsuit that day, opting instead for a crisp white button-down shirt, its sleeves neatly rolled to her elbows, and a profound calmness in her posture that eloquently declared, "This is not about grand showmanship. This is unequivocally about enduring change." She stood gracefully behind the podium, adjusted the microphone to her height, and began in that same, even, resonant tone that had carried so much quiet power weeks earlier in the train compartment. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Today, I am immensely proud to formally announce the launch of a company-wide initiative meticulously designed to ensure that what transpired with my daughter, and tragically with so many others in silence, will never ever happen again." A quiet rustle moved through the seated crowd of reporters, stakeholders, and Transcontinental Rail employees. Dr. Dubois paused for just a brief second, then continued, "We are calling it the Dubois Standard, named not merely because she is my daughter, but because she profoundly reminded all of us what true dignity looks like when it is rigorously tested, and what courage truly sounds like when it speaks softly, but with an unyielding firmness." Behind her, a series of slides appeared on the large screen. The Dubois Standard, a framework for dignity in every journey. Bullet points followed outlining the comprehensive changes, mandatory implicit bias training for all train crew and station staff. A new escalation review board which will crucially include community passengers and youth representatives. Real-time reporting options for in-journey discrimination concerns. And a fundamentally new train boarding procedure where station agents would verbally re-announce the names of unaccompanied minors in executive or business class, not to scrutinize, but to explicitly confirm, protect, and empower them. No child ever again would be asked with suspicion, "Are you absolutely sure you belong here?" without someone immediately ready and willing to confidently answer, "Yes, absolutely, and we are diligently watching." Dr. Dubois gracefully stepped aside, and a smaller, yet profoundly confident figure approached the podium, dressed neatly in a navy blue blazer and light gray pants, the very same attire she had worn on that fateful journey. Simone Dubois, 12 years old, the microphone adjusted just a little lower to accommodate her height. She cleared her throat, no flash of fear in her eyes, just a calm, direct focus. And then she spoke her words, neither too fast nor too slow, delivered with a measured cadence. "My name is Simone," she said, her young voice resonating with an undeniable maturity. "And I wish to say just one thing. Respect should never ever require a title to be graciously given. I did not desire attention. I did not wish to become famous. I simply desired to sit where I rightfully belonged and to be treated as if I deserved to be there." Her words landed with the undeniable weight of truth elegantly wrapped in the mantle of innocence. I was indeed scared, but I did not run away. I did not raise my voice in anger. I simply called my mom because that is precisely what she meticulously taught me. When something is wrong, you speak clearly, and you stand still, unwavering. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. I sincerely hope no other kid ever has to experience that. And if they unfortunately do, I profoundly hope someone listens, truly listens. The room did not erupt in boisterous applause. It didn't need to. What filled the expansive space was something far deeper, more profound, that quiet, throat-thickening recognition that you had just heard something truly, unforgettably real. After the press conference concluded, dozens of prominent media outlets eagerly picked up the story. But this time, it was not merely about a young girl being unjustly removed from her seat. It was rather about what meticulously followed, about the profound silence that through courage transformed into a foundational structure, about the systemic approach that didn't just offer a hollow apology, but actively transformed itself. Other rail lines quietly at first, then publicly reached out to Transcontinental Rail for partnership access to the Dubois Standard Amtrak 6A rail, even some regional carriers within the industry. The entire tone within Transcontinental Rail shifted almost literally overnight. Crew briefings now regularly included new empathetic language emphasizing passenger equity checks. Training sessions now incorporated real-life playback of Simone's interaction presented not as a moment of public shame, but as an invaluable learning model. And in Journey After Journey, something truly remarkable began to happen. More train attendants consistently made genuine eye contact when greeting children. More station agents paused to explain procedures with greater clarity and patience. More unspoken moments transpired where the system no longer simply moved people from one point to another, but genuinely saw them recognize their humanity. And Eleanor Vance, she never returned to the rail line. After her unavoidable termination, she sent a letter addressed not to Transcontinental Rail's HR department, but directly to Simone. It read in part, "I do not for a single moment expect your forgiveness, Simone, but I genuinely want you to know that you taught me more in 5 fleeting minutes than I had painstakingly learned in 18 entire years of working on the rails. I cannot with all my might undo what I regrettably did, but I can, and I solemnly promise that if I ever work with people again, I will approach every interaction with a profound difference." Simone read at once her expression unreadable, then meticulously folded it. She did not respond, but she carefully placed it in a special folder her mother had started for her. Not a scrapbook filled with trauma, but a meticulously organized timeline of profound transformation. Life, as much as possible, returned to its normal rhythm. Simone went back to school, diligently practiced chess after her classes, and attended a vibrant summer robotics camp. But she was no longer merely a quiet, exceptionally smart kid who traveled frequently. She was a potent symbol, not because she actively desired to be, but because the world in its yearning for justice needed one, and she carried that weighty responsibility with a remarkable lightness. She never ostentatiously wore it on her sleeve, only subtly in the dignified way she carried herself, a little taller, a little slower to speak, a little quicker to truly listen. One crisp morning, 2 months after that pivotal journey, Simone and her mother boarded a different transcontinental rail journey, this time from Atlanta to Denver. They walked through the gate quietly. No press, no grand announcement, just another mother and daughter embarking on a trip. But something was distinctly different. As they stepped into the executive car, the train attendant, a new face, looked directly at Simone and said without a single hesitation, "Welcome back, Miss Dubois. 3B is perfectly ready for you." Simone smiled a genuine warm smile, then replied, "Thank you, ma'am, but you can simply call me Simone." They sat down. No fanfare, no intrusive flashbulbs, just a quiet, pervasive peace. "Doctor." Dubois looked over at her daughter and asked softly, "You are well, my love?" Simone nodded, her eyes bright. "Yes, Mom. I don't necessarily need a big, luxurious seat. I just unequivocally need a fair one." Dr. Dubois smiled a deep, knowing smile. "That, my darling, is the enduring legacy." And as the magnificent train lifted from the ground, carrying them forward into the boundless horizon, so too did something else. A profound new standard in the skies of human interaction. Thank you for taking the time to absorb this narrative. If this story resonated with you, please share it widely. Not merely to spread awareness, but to serve as a powerful reminder to others that quiet dignity possesses the power to change absolutely everything. Remember to embrace kindness, to seek justice, and never ever underestimate the transformative power of standing your ground with unwavering grace. The story of Simone quietly reminds us that strength isn't always loud. It doesn't need to shout or prove itself through conflict. Sometimes it sits in silence, back straight eyes, steady holding dignity like a quiet flame in the wind. What Simone taught us isn't just about injustice or policy. It's about grace. About how we carry ourselves when the world looks the other way, about choosing to respond with calm when it would be so easy to fall apart. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Have you ever been in a moment where you were seen as less than you are, where your worth had to stand up on its own without titles, names, or credentials to protect it? What did you do? How did you hold on to your truth? If this story stirred something in you, we'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. If it reminded you of someone, a friend, a student, a parent, feel free to share this with them. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories like Simone's filled with quiet strength and deep meaning, gently press that subscribe button. Thank you truly for being here, for listening, for feeling, and for choosing kindness always.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.